Hey guys, I'm Matt Lighty. This video, we're talking about a build that I made that I planned on using for something, and then I ended up barely using it for that thing. But the build itself is very fun, it's very good. It's kind of a trade league build, but the framework has existed for a few leagues now, and it's going to probably exist next league in some way. So we're going to go over it. So it's a life stacking Inquisitor. And the basis of the build revolves around converting life into ES using Energy Blade and Ivory Tower to give yourself a very large ES pool. And Ivory Tower in conjunction with things like Coruscating Flask that has 100% uptime due to things like the Trader Keystone using less flasks. This is a bit of fiddling to do, but it ends up being that you always have 3 flasks up with minimal investment. So this kind of like a ghetto mage blood for unique flasks. You could use other flasks here, but these are the 3 I'm using. The reason I'm using Bismuth with resistance is because this build is using a Glimpse of Chaos, because you're kind of double dipping the beneficial effects of the fact that we're converting life to ES and that sort of vibe. And we're a blood magic build, so the mana roll doesn't matter. And the fact that the chaos resistance is 0 is actually kind of lit, because it's effectively like, since we're using a lot of uniques and a lot of things that don't have chaos res rolls, it's as if the helmet says 75 chaos res, right? It puts it at 0, meaning it can't ever go below 0. I'm just taking baseline chaos damage. Now, we are using a few uniques here. One of the easy ones to get is Shaper's Touch. None of the corruptions matter, by the way. If you see corruptions, don't worry about that. Shaper's Touch, extremely accessible. The 2% evasion per tenant, and then also the 2% ES per strength, and the that sort of stuff scales really well, because we are on top of life stacking. We're stat stacking, being int and strength, taking the advantage of the large amount of int and strength to utilize things from the Inquisitor. Gives us huge amounts of crit. And then the Inquisitor also gives us the crit pen, so we don't have to worry about like negative res. And then we get a little bit of nice conk ground from Sanctuary. And then Battle Mage, which of course stacks with Spell Blade, wherever the fuck it is. That combined with Energy Blade, a lot of blades, right? This makes it so our main hand gives us a ton of flat, and then the Battle Mage and the Spell Blade convert it all. So you'll see here, it's going to get weird. So I have no mana. I have a little bit of life. My flasks are rotating, but they do have 100% uptime. I have a ton of ES, all right? So we have Energy Blade. Now, Energy Blade's a funky thing. It converts a large chunk of your ES basically into flat lightning damage, okay? And then it gives us less energy shield. But if you increase the quality, you actually get more energy shield, so it's reducing the amount of less. So having things like Enhanced link to it is very beneficial. Glimpse of Chaos is a funny unique off of Trial Master. You can actually get specific unique implicits like this +1 min charge thing. One of the outcomes you can get is +2 socketed gems, which is wild. So if you had like, Awakened Enhance, it would be level 7, and it would be given just ridiculous amounts of quality. So there's some cool things you could do. Also, the fact the Enhance is linked to Call to Arms and Enduring Cry, both of which gain CDR from this, means they're just popping every 2 seconds, basically, very frequently. So we have all this flat lightning damage that we're gaining. Tons amounts of flat lightning. This 250,000 flat lightning is being added to whatever we want because of Spell Blade and Battle Mage. And the spell I chose to use is Exsanguinate on a trap. It's really comfy with the new automation. Plus, I wanted, this is my build in dedication of Pride Month, the extra zesty month, using an extra zesty skill. I got my little fairy wings on, and I got my rainbow Exsanguinate. So I'm here as an ally. The Inquisitor is an ally. Other cool interactions, this is where like helical rings come in cracked. Tons of stats, and then just a Calandras, because it's cheaper to use a Calandras than a second helical ring. Again, stats equals ES equals life, equals scaling for us. That kind of converts all around into ES and life. So that's where it's like reserving all of our stuff, gives us a huge ES pool, and feels extra comfy. Wrathpith Glow being a life stacking build, gives us a bunch of crit and a bunch of damage, which feels fantastic. And then Headhunter, just because it feels good. You could use something that's not a Headhunter, There's other options if you want. Some people use the shaper belt, which I've seen that being used, but the headhunter just feels good on a build like this. If you take a look at belts, I'm show you the shaper one because it's kind of neat. Tides of Time, you could roll Tides of Time so it has utility flask scanning charges. These are all utility flasks, right? So you could, you know, run an extra flask, I think, even if you run this build. And then flask effects increase also. So there's some cool things you could do. Mage build doesn't really work because you need to have coruscating flask up all the time. I have these on charge when full. You could do these on reuse and manually click them, but it's like a whole level of shit I don't want to deal with. And for amulets, using a Great Wolf, because again, additional attributes is like, you know, that we're scaling strength and int, so that makes a lot of sense. So strength and int scaling, you notice the tree is a little wackadoodle, and if you don't know why for some reason this line is orange and that line's not orange, it's because it's leading up to split personalities. These give this amount of stats depending on how far they are. Nuzzling them into this cluster makes them as far as possible, meaning each split personality. These are int life. You'd probably want strength life, but doesn't really make a difference. You're giving 70 int and life each, so that's fantastic. The build is an adorn build, and just to prove a point at how, honestly, this build is really cheap to build. It might look complicated with a lot of moving parts and uniques and stuff, but it's actually an incredibly cheap build to use. If you don't have a Glimpse of Chaos that's good, you can use a Helm of the Inward Eye. It's honestly better in some circumstances. Again, Shaper build instead of Headhunter if that's more accessible. You don't need a Calandra. You can just use 2 rings that have high strength and int. And yeah, it's very accessible for those reasons. And then again, this is an adorned build. I want you to take a look at my adorn if I could fucking find it, just to prove a point kind of at how it doesn't matter. I'm using a 64% adorned. A 64%. That's my second highest adorned, so don't make fun of me, but it's a 64%. The one amendment I am making, which in solo stuff one is annoying, is getting an impossible escape for perfect agony. This allows me to jump down over here and grab these flask nodes. If you run the shaper belt, you don't need the flask nodes, and if you just click your flasks manually, you don't need the flask nodes, but I just wanted to be lazy. That's why I'm running the flask nodes. It's really that simple. A couple of cool key interactions. So much strength gives us a lot of damage from Iron Will. Eternal Youth gives us a lot of ES recoup. The fact we're on low life means Pain Attunement works. Blood Magic means the cost of our everything is on, you know, life, so we don't have to deal with worrying about that sort of stuff. Running a tremendous amount of auras. Grace hooked up to the amount of evasion scaling we get from Shaper's Touch is really funny. So if you turn off Grace, you'll see my chance to evade 9%, Grace on 73%. Wow, what a difference, right? So it's a huge amount of evasion there. Love to see it. Element immunity from Purity of Elements, you know, just pretty comfy overall, and a little bit of move speed from Quicksilver. I think these are like legacy rules, but not that it really matters. I think that's pretty much it for the basis of the build when it goes to going over stuff. Tremendous amounts of life regen into ES. And yeah, you could use whatever skill you want. Like I'm using, again, Exsanguinate. If you want, for example, to use something like Arc or Spark or EK, doesn't really matter. It's just the framework of the build kind of stays the same. The sort of maps I was running was kind of things like this. You know, rare, the adversaries scarabs are great because they're headhunter. But I made this build initially because I wanted to run maps that I didn't feel like running on another build. So like, you know, anything that had minus max I didn't really want to run on my my chieftain build, right? So for that I just saved them. That's why I made this character, so I can run these sort of maps. I could run, it seems I could run anything but no regen and less recovery. Those were giving me problems. I think that's basically it. But the build, yeah, the one thing you have to look out for, just as a friendly reminder, because sometimes it doesn't work. If you walk in the map, you can't gain a charge until you've done an action, pretty much. So what happens is, when you walk in the map, I'd recommend just hitting your coruscating flask, right? Once it's hit once, it'll start automating and you'll never have an issue. But yeah, literally I was getting milked. But what the build looks like is you just end up with a tremendous EK chain, right? My damage says 500k, or Exsanguinate chain. And again, I'm using Exsanguinate just because it has tremendous clear. Mine's linked to Awakened chain. You don't need Awakened chain. You could even run on a 5-link and it's fine. I can actually just take this off just to prove a point, I guess. But crit damage, Spellblade, Exsanguinate, Charge Mine, High Impact Mine. You could swap that Exsanguinate for any skill, and this is going to feel still very good without Awakened chain or really any chain. Awakened chain just makes it extra spicy. The only thing it kind of struggles with, I guess, is single target, but it really doesn't matter too much because you could kind of just sit there and hold right click. Let's put this back in because it really makes it excel when you have Awakened Chain. Ooh, little T17. I don't really want that in my life, but I'll take it. But yeah, again, the build's really comfy. Headhunter right now is very cheap, so if you want to make a build to play in standard, I would say most of the base components in this build, at least the variations I have, easily under 20 divines, right? Nothing here is going to be breaking the bank or expensive. There's some single target. This is a back to basic map with like some mods, just to show like the single target's perfectly acceptable. I wouldn't recommend doing uber bosses with this, but you could make other variations, like just swapping skills to make this more single target oriented is very accessible. But I think this version for clearing feels really good. It ticks a lot of boxes. I'm just going to eat this. All right, that killed me. So with minus res, I'm not immortal. I've seen variations of the build run basically dropping most of the offensive auras and running triple purity. That's totally fine. You could also, instead of running triple purity, run, since Chorus Gang's a ruby, run a sapphire here, and then run a topaz here. You'll be a little bit slower because of the quicksilver, but if you do that version, you'll end up with 90 all res. So that obviously is way more comfy, just a little bit slower. Not that it really matters too much because, you know, once you start kind of going with Headhunter, you'll pick up some movement speed. But yeah, initially it's a little bit slower. But the fact, like, Exsanguinate with Awakened Chain, such a comfy combination as basically a delivery mechanism for all the flat elemental damage we have, being the lightning. It just feels great. It turns corners, you know, it like bends it like Beckham. Big fan of that in general. A little fun tip you could do also is if you Energy Blade replaces your main hand, but what you can do, funnily enough, is just roll an item that has an abyssal socket, and you retain, not only do you retain the actual gems, but you do retain the value of the socket. So you can gain one little extra socket by just making an abyssal socketed item. I still gain the Corrupting Blood immunity. I still gain the stuff from that. So fun little trick there. What else is there really to talk about in this build? Yeah, I mean, there's tons of variations. I've seen some versions that run in a more active, open map setting. They'll pick up Instruments of Zeal, which basically means if you're playing a build that has high cast speed scaling, like an EK or a Spark, etc., you're going to be shield charging around a lot to gain those stacks, and then when you actually cast your Spark or your whatever, you'll have huge amounts of cast speed with it, which feels good, but it's a level of active play that wasn't really attractive to me personally. To me, I like this level of just kind of slow and steady trudging around. Currently level 100, right? But you've seen my Adorned, you know? You've seen what I got packing here. You could drop 12 jewel sockets and the build wouldn't, instead of 14,000, yes, I'll be at 10,000, wouldn't make a fundamental difference in how this is built. So aside from that, nothing is really too expensive. An Ivory Tower is cheap, a Wrathpith is cheap. Any percent greatwolf, like obviously you'd want a suffix that has value, like crit multi or something, or like life as the prefix. Doesn't matter. You can run a Helm of the Inward Eye, and you'll have easier time getting res, and you'll have more stats. Like this build is actually quite cheap to get going, and it's all about whatever variation you want for whatever kind of feels the best. So yeah. Let's take a quick look on P.O Ninja at some of the other archetypes of this build, just so I could showcase them. And then they're going to have the same framework, it's just going to be a different skill. But there's some zesty ones during the zesty month, so let's go over those. Okay, so it's actually pretty funny. There's a lot of hex, they're almost all Inquisitors. We're just going to click on Inquisitor, but here's the framework, right? Brutal Restraint, this is for the Trader, the keystone that lets us get flash charges. Coruscating so we don't die with Ivory Tower, Shapers for scaling, Wrathpith for scaling. And a lot of other stuff is like not guaranteed usage. A lot of people use Cyclopean Coil, 18% attributes, makes perfect sense. It's a lot of attributes, it's a lot of life on it, so really nice value there instead of a Headhunter. More consistent play, but not a big deal. Calandras, because there's no reason not to. Adorned, because all roads lead to Adorned. And just some cool stuff going on here. So we're just going to go down the list here. So you have an Arc version. This guy is just self-casting Arc of Surging. Very simple. Instead of doing the chain that goes around, it splits instead. Some people like that, fine. He's using an Astra Mentis instead of a Greatwolf. Cheaper and not a terrible option. It actually might be more beneficial depending on your stats, and he's also using Cyclopean Coil. This guy's gear, no offense to him, is very, very shit. It's very, very basic. Using a Malachi Simula to give himself blood magic to save a couple points, and also chance to do double damage, 20% chance to double damage. So it's huge value here for this guy's build. And again, you could basically play this really easily and not have much of an issue. The next guy is doing a Hexblast Miner. Way more damage for single target. He's utilizing Curtain Call to get the advantage of the Dex and Int, or in this case, the Int to give you an additional mine. Mine throwing speed feels good. The socketed 80% means it probably came from a Glimpse helmet, because I think that's normally 90%, but using that to get a little bit of extra stuff in here. And you can see this is like a very, very, very high-end one. Multiple voices, very nice adorned, tons of jewels like this. These aren't the most desirable, and these aren't the hardest to get, but it's kind of just life plus any roll that matters. There's a lot of variation, but these are all just attributes. Totally fine there. Very accessible still nonetheless. This is probably going to be a COC version. Yep, so this guy's doing, again, the same framework, just swapping his boots for Stampede, because he's doing cast on crit Cyclone. You have a 100% chance to crit with the build, right? Between Wrathbith, between being an Inquisitor, so he's utilizing that to do COC, just because he wants to poop out a bunch of Ice Spears. Totally fine, you know, let the man do it. Stampede mitigates the movement speed issues that comes with Cyclone COC. Everything else is basically the same. There's the Inward Eye we're talking about versus using the Glimpse of Chaos helmet, and no adorned, just so you know, no adorned here, utilizing the same split personality setups, but just some nice rare jewels and that sort of stuff. So totally viable option as well. Penance Brand. First 4 builds are all different. This is like kind of the healthy meta of the build I was discussing. Same framework. This guy's using the Headhunter instead, and again with the Inward Eye. He's playing, however, Penance Brand of Dissipation, so way more single target focused, and he has a little Flesh and Flame set up for some Arcane Blessing shenanigans, but framework is essentially the same, just a huge amount of single target. This guy might be doing more of a bossing type vibe. Very possible there. We have a Blazing Salvo. Is this going to be COC? This is. So COC Blazing Salvo, instead of doing Cyclone to trigger COC, he's doing Lancing Steel of Spraying with return projectiles, right? So he's attacking, and then he's going to crit, and all those projectiles are going to shoot at an immense amount of Blazing Salvos. And they're going to return, and it's going to return. It's going to be a whole cacophony of probably screen projectile melting nonsense. Using a rare belt, though, instead for attribute scaling. Instead of the Cyclopean, gets him a little bit more stats, if that's something he's interested in. But again, framework is essentially the same there. Another cool version, this one's utilizing Tornado, the new Tornado of Elemental Turbulence, to give a large amount of damage. He's not even bothered specifying what type of damage with, you know, he's blocking any sort of damage types. He's just letting it let loose. It's just the functionality of the skill. It doesn't really matter. Again, you know, the framework is so rock steady in this build that you could just do, you know, whatever you want for skills, and it just kind of doesn't matter. Whatever feels the best as a means of conveying your DPS. So in this case, this guy wants to Tornado because he likes how it plays. And there's the Abyssal socket you could see on his weapon to utilize that free socket from Energy Blade. And finally, here's a guy playing Spark. Same thing with the Abyssal socket, utilizing a... Actually, it's funny, it's the exact same Great Wolf I have, which is the Pierce one. But utilizing Spark with Echo and Faster Proj, just to get that comfy, kind of sparky playstyle. Something maybe I'll look into, because I'm playing and doing Toxic Sewers especially. This could be more beneficial. But again, same framework, except he's using Mage Blood, and he is manually casting this. So because he's using Mage Blood and manual casting Coruscating, that means that the second this Coruscating drops, or for whatever reason if he allowed it to drop since he's manually casting it, any amount of damage would pretty much one-shot you. So you just got to be careful with that, because it's at reuse at end, which means its uptime is very, very large. But if this drops, you are a dead person. So keep that in mind. That's one of the downsides of using Mage Blood, but I don't think this guy gives a shit because his gear is pretty damn good. But yeah, that's the basis for the Inquisitor life stacking, stat stacking kind of build framework. It's a very, very fun shell of a build that you could kind of do whatever you want with. Again, for me, I'm doing Exsanguinate Traps. Maybe I'll try Spark. Maybe I'll try one of the Arcs. The tree doesn't really change more than 3 points for me. I would move these 3 points out and then put them somewhere else, and then the tree is basically identical. So tons of room to experiment, tons of room to grow. The build, I don't think this is... I mean, it could get nerfed, but again, nothing here costs a whole lot. You don't need a Headhunter. You can use a Cyclopean Coil, which is nothing off of Elder. You can use an Astramentus there. And it's very accessible. So would recommend checking this type of build out for the remainder of the league, or in standard, or something like next league, assuming it doesn't get really hit too hard. But nothing it's really using was substantially buffed, so I don't know why it would be substantially nerfed. Either way, I'm Matt Lighty. This has been the Inquisitor stacking framework build thingy. Have fun playing PoE, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Lighty out. Bye-bye.